Hey there, everybody. This is Jeremy with Mental Health Heroes, and this is a new segment that we're going to start doing. Uh, if Nexodon lets us keep it, it's called Mental Health Heroes Interviews, and then we'll have the person's name after that. This is Mental Health Heroes Interviews Jonathan Grizzell, or Grizzle, as we like to call him.
Grizzled.
And we're interviewing him in particular because of the impact that mental health can have on us as individuals, and how Dungeons and Dragons might be able to help people like us, or maybe somebody like y'all. There's a couple of things I want to, like housekeeping things I want to talk about first. First of all, even though Jonathan is a mental health professional, these are really our opinions. This is not a scientific study. This is not a proven approach to anything. So don't take what we're saying by the gospel. Okay, this is just our opinions about what's going on and how it helps us, and what we feel it can do for people who need it. So first off, let's introduce our esteemed guest. It's my good friend Jonathan Grizzell. So tell the people a little bit about yourself and what your credentials are, if you don't mind.
Hey, Jeremy. Thanks for inviting me in. My name is Jonathan Grizzell. I'm a licensed mental health therapist. I've been working in the mental health field. This January will be 24 years. I am a card carrying member of Introverts Unite Separately in our caves, and probably started playing Dungeons and Dragons because I knew that I needed socialization and wasn't getting that anywhere else, and that definitely kept me from suffering isolation that would probably cause me to, as a therapist, be depressed and anxious. And part of self care and being able to provide for other people is making sure you take care of yourself. As I say every day, you can't pour from an empty cup. And there are a great bunch of people that join that have the same interests that are probably one of the best ways for you to feel better about yourself is to hang around people like the people in our Dungeons and Dragons group.
That's interesting. You bring up a couple of really interesting points that I want to touch on. First thing is some generalization questions. How important is self care? As somebody who sometimes to a flaw, like, and I've seen it from you, will give more than they can and forget to take care of themselves. Um, I find it interesting that I'm not the only one who needs stuff like Dungeons and Dragons or playing video games or reading a good book to facilitate self care. So tell me a little bit about that and its importance to an individual.
I mean, I don't think we as a society, caregivers care deeply, but they hurt deeply. And in the way we're society we're in now, there's so much negativity that if you don't look at the positive, and if you don't fill that up, and if you don't replace it, and make time for yourself and your family and your friends, you will burn out. There are at least 7 of the 9 symptoms of burnout that will cause you to have major depression, even if you don't have major depression. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to shower. You don't want to talk to people. You just want to go hide and avoid everything. And giving is probably part of who I am, part of who you are as Nexodon. I'm guessing. But if you give, it's kind of like you see the holes in other people and you cut that hole out of yourself and give it to them. They may or may not accept it. They may reject it. And if you're not careful, you will continue to deplete yourself to a point that you're a miserable mess. And you can. One of the things I'd like to say is it's kind of like a locus of control. We want control. We have anxiety, we worry, we think about stuff, we plan for the future, especially intelligent people, but we tend to look at the negative. And sometimes the only control that we have is how we respond. If we spend a lot of time trying to control the situation, bad things are going to happen. We're going to feel like a failure. We have to look at ourselves and see that I can control how I respond, and that's all. I cannot control whether or not they listen. And as an empathic person, if you tell somebody something and they don't listen, they don't learn from it, they don't grow, you would feel poorly. I say this with parents all the time. They never say they helped their child make 100 in math class. But if their child makes a 50, they're like, I should have done more, I should have done this, I blame myself. So you don't take credit for the positive, and you blame yourself for the negative. And there's a lot of things that determine whether or not that child did poorly. And so realizing that you are a model for the child and you show them the behaviors you want to see and you give them encouragement will make you feel better, but you can't blame yourself for what they do. Generally, we have negative thoughts about ourselves. So if I tell you, Jeremy, 100 compliments and one sarcastic comment, I guarantee you, no matter how intelligent you are, you're going to remember the one sarcastic negative one that you agree with, and you will live as if it's true. And the 100 positive things that I said about you that I believe is true, you discount and you take away. And that is human nature, not picking on Jeremy specifically. That's pretty much everything.
Well, a little bit more to that note is one thing that I see a lot of writers or actors and actresses or other creatives that put things out there for people um, to consume is they always say the mantra, don't read the comments or don't read the critiques or don't read what people have said about them, but then you find them they do that anyway because they hunger for that affirmation, or maybe in some weird cases they might thrive off of that negative feedback. um, which goes to the point with what you're talking about is that though some of us will say things like, well, other people don't matter or other people's opinions don't matter, they still hunger for that attention anyway, which is I find is unusual. But getting back to the point, specifically, why do you think not just Dungeons and Dragons but tabletop role playing games in general help combat not only the feelings that we just discussed with self care, but also with depression or things of that nature? Because, well, and the reason why I say not just Dungeons and Dragons, because there's a ton of great board games out there that you can play. But why do you think it helps combat the depression and things of that nature?
I believe one of the major reasons is because it's technically play therapy for adults. I think that play therapy is a wonderful thing that works with kids that helps them deal with stuff that's really hard to say verbally, so you can play and interact. And I think that we as adults can also benefit from that. I've got some stuff written down because I was afraid I couldn't remember it all, so give me a second here. But I did this specifically for me because you're right. This is a small sample size. I didn't go out and interview a lot of people. I base it off of me and what I'm going through, and that is not scientific at this point, but using kind of examples of what I'm going through. Maybe somebody else be going through it too. Like you said earlier, you know, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that says that I'm stupid and have to stop and say, no, I did something stupid and redirect it. But it hones your social skills. I mean, I'm seriously sitting here talking to somebody and it's being produced and put on YouTube. Guess what? If I wasn't doing this kind of thing right now, I'd be in my bedroom playing Animal Crossing. uh, and also, uh, it boosts our creative problem solving skills. You know, thinking outside the box. There are times in my day to day life now that, in order to do deep breathing exercises, that kind of thing that I always thought was boring and dull, I can go to a Dungeons and Dragons setting of my choice and then look at certain skills and spells and ways that they would deal with the problem in that setting that is totally fantasy. But what I've just done is taught myself to positively reframe, redirect, breathe, and calm down. Um, and modeling those kind of behaviors makes it easier, and it's part of the self-care process. Um, One of the things that I think is beneficial now is during the quarantine, we're all basically put in timeout and we're all set at home. We don't have the social settings. Doing this online, specifically this way, gives you a very great way to interact with your friends and not feel as isolated and cut off and sad. And it gives you something to think about, and it produces endorphins and serotonin. And, congratulations, that's therapy. And it's not how I would expect it. It's the new normal or whatever, but it also, I'm not sitting in my room by myself, and I get to talk with friends, and it's not the same. You can't physically be there, but it's more about how you act and react with it. Congratulations, we're now in a conversation talking, even though we're on different sides of the county.
So basically, you're saying that not only does it help you to address those concerns as far as being able to redirect and assess and deep breaths and things, that mantra that you have, but it also helps you to. This is coming from somebody who is uh, socially. I've got a lot of the markers. I'll just say that I've got the body dysmorphia. I got the
Negative
depression.
thinking.
I've got all that kind of stuff, and I am. What is the term, if you don't mind me asking real quick, where you don't like to go out in social situations?
It's not agoraphobia unless you can't leave the house, but that's what most people think of. It's a social phobia. It's a
Right,
social
like
anxiety kind of thing.
it's like I dread going into the stores and things like that. Anyway, there's a term for it, and I forget what it is. But Dungeons and Dragons itself has helped me to just overwhelm that, just take it out of the equation. Why do you think it is? Do you think it's the fantasy aspect of it, of being able to pretend to be something else? Or do you think it's just a way that you wrap yourself in like a comfortable blanket and you can walk in, or in this case, a suit of armor, where you feel protected? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
I think it's both. I think it's an escape. I think that it is a fantasy, but it's also doing that connects you. Um, I was afraid of roller coasters. Do you know how you get over your fear of roller coasters?
You ride one.
You have to get on the roller coaster. You have to ride it and not die. If you have difficulty going outside and seeing people and talking to them, if you were to, if you live as if you're going to die if you go out, that's how you will feel. If you live as if you're on armor and you're escaping and you go out, congratulations, you escaped and you did it. And then when you get home, you're more likely to do it again. It kind of gives you an extra layer. It's a comfort, but it's also we live too much, not as the world is or how true it is, but how we feel. And if we base it off of I feel people are looking at me, I feel that I'm walking too slowly, so they're going to get upset. I feel that stuff. You live as if it's true, even if that's the farthest thing from the truth, because you're very good at realizing things based off your feelings, and it works most of the time. But sometimes it lies to you, and sometimes it betrays you. So you use this to feel like you're this person. You go out and do that, and therefore, congratulations, you are that person. You faked it till you make it.
I think Nexodon has something to say. Do you have something to say, Dave?
Social anxiety disorder.
That is exactly it. I was about to say that. The other aspect I wanted to touch on a little bit with these games is why do you feel like I'm a real advocate of this practice, which is making a character who is inherently flawed in some way, who has some kind of past trauma or personality quirk that makes them a little bit more vulnerable to something. For an example, I have a paladin who puts all his faith into his church and believes that that church can do no wrong, and that sometimes can be, when something does happen, it's going to cause a bad situation for him. But we have a tendency, especially if you enjoy the role playing aspect of it, to create these characters that are flawed, that have these weaknesses and these difficulties to overcome before they can become who they're supposed to be. Why do you think players such as myself, and you to a degree, you do have some characters that have flaws, and you're now grasping that more than you would have in the past. But why do you think that we do that and we enjoy those type of characters more than just a cut and dry type of character?
I'm going to start by answering the least significant part first, and say that the flaws for me were difficult because in real life I have always thought that if I'm not perfect, I'm a failure.
Hmm.
So that means that if I made a 99 on a test, I thought I failed. Uh, I had to learn that the best way to learn things is by making mistakes. It's a lesson or a lesson or whatever kind of catechism you want to use. But I didn't give myself permission or forgiveness to have flaws. So one of the things about making a character with flaws then would be that you can see the good in them anyways, and you can work on that, and it's interesting and it's okay. And when you see somebody, Jeremy, if you see a quality that you have that you don't like in you, but you see it in me, you are very kind, very forgiving, very understanding. You can work through that. That's okay, Jonathan. You don't want to do this because you have social anxiety too. I totally understand. No problem. But when I have it, it's a huge problem. So, one of the things about your characters with flaws, other than they're incredible, is that um, they're more human. They're more. It's not as much fantasy then. And to be honest with you, that gives us permission to accept our flaws. Even though our friends make fun of our baldness, I've learned to accept it somewhat. um, but with storyline and with character, we need these flaws. We need to have that kind of stuff because we need to connect with that other person. We need to see that we don't have to be perfect, that we can have these flaws. And sometimes those flaws are what makes the game better, but also in real life, it makes our life better. Let's say that you have a character that is afraid of dragons, for example, and he
Sure.
works to fight a dragon because his other characteristics that love his family, his friends that are going to that, gets him through to that point. The fact that he's afraid of dragons and fighting and slays a dragon means so much more than just, you know, I rolled a 22. Does that hit the dragon? But it humanizes it. And that's where the escape and the fantasy is the best because we can go there and we can be anything we want. But in real life, we sometimes don't realize that we've got an escapist fantasy world in which we are imprisoning ourselves and living as if these thoughts are true. And breaking through those in the game could help you in real life break through your social phobia to you're willing to be on YouTube just because your friends ask you.
So basically, you're saying that even with creating of the flawed characters and things of that nature, it's still a way of play therapy. That it's a way for us to address issues that we're uncomfortable with in a comfortable way that makes us feel productive, almost subconsciously, as opposed to consciously addressing our flaws and our weaknesses and our depressions and things of that nature. That this play therapy helps us to uh, address those things without us really even knowing it. Is that kind of what you're?
I think so. I think that there's more to it in that if we're physically doing something, that's another core memory. If you say something out loud, that's one. If you hear something, that's one. If you think something, that's one. And by doing those activities, it fights against your what I call stinking thinking. But the thing about play therapy that does the best, in my opinion, is it takes away your overthinking. You're just basically doing. You're doing, and that's why we work with kids so well because they're talking about some, and I'm not going into details because I don't want to be a window into the horrible, nasty stuff that sometimes goes on. But the kid could be talking about some severe trauma. I can give you one that won't hurt. There was this child who was mixed race that was making Legos, and they found some Lego pieces that were children of different color. And they turned to me and said, "This means that you accept somebody no matter who or what they are, just like my foster mom." It was just Legos to me, but it meant so much to them. And they're like, "So that means a white person can take care of a black person, it'd be okay, and they can still be family." This is a kid 5 years old playing with Legos, having some major, huge interactions and thought processes, and only they weren't able to talk about that for the first 6 months that I saw them. Only while playing and just not thinking about it did they do so.
I see.
Lego Movie is a good example, by the way. That's
Oh,
play therapy. I mean, just for an example, I'm not throwing out movie recommendations, but that's play therapy. You know, Mr. Bossman or whatever was his dad, and I mean that's just play therapy to the core. And he couldn't express that or say that any other way. It took that for it to happen.
sure, sure. That's a great example, actually. Now I'm going to touch on something that maybe we don't either one of us have a real answer for. But the what I'm going to talk about is you and I specifically drive our characters through not the numbers, through the creation of those characters' personal aspects and their flaws. Now, we both know players who don't want that. They don't want that deep personal connection to their characters. They don't want that in the game. They do want the numbers. They want to crunch the numbers. They want to be able to work the system in ways where their characters do no wrong and things of that nature. And that's how they play the game. They don't play the game with any kind of investment. Why do you think that is in some cases? Why do you think that those individual players don't um, accept the healing process that these tabletop role playing games can offer? Do you think it's something that's they don't they just don't give them enough credit, or you think it's some kind of personal blockade?
I feel like it's one of those ways of thinking. Sometimes it doesn't matter what's going on as long as things look well that some people can have, and then so you would want more power, more crits, more uh, tanking, that kind of thing, because you want to show how much better you are in this fantasy world, and you pretend to be Superman with no flaws. And I feel like that's more along the lines of people trying to ignore the stuff that's going on that does that, or don't see it that way sometimes. But it's not too far off from you and I, who we turn it internally and make it more about our internal struggle. They're getting their internal struggle out by possibly expressing themselves more, and they normally wouldn't do that. Being aggressive in certain situations and taking chances when they wouldn't, or they could also just uh, feel so alone and scared at times that it's fight or flight. If I'm scared, I don't want to be scared, so I'm angry. And if I'm angry and I push people away and I hurt them, I don't have to feel scared. So it's still play therapy to me. It's just what they're doing is they're choosing anger or aggression or the power, that kind of stuff, to not feel the stuff and change it instead of accepting it and beating ourselves up because we didn't learn that in our 30s.
Do you think that we both met players like this as well? Um, those players who like to outsmart the system, so to speak. They like to find certain or meta players, as you might say, who like to who like to work their way around a dungeon master. Or, for an example, we had a player who built a character entirely on grappling, who would grab an opponent, throw them to the ground, and then keep them there for an entire round. Um, do you think players like that, who want to feel dominant over the rest of the group through their intellect, that they are doing that because somewhere else in their life there's some kind of inferiority, some kind of a situation that makes them feel smaller or lesser, and then they're able to post their superiority in their minds, their superiority in their intelligence on the way things work in Dungeons and Dragons? Do you think that's why they do that?
It's almost as if you read the paper of the notes that I wrote down. Yes, I very much so. It's a form of control. It's like sometimes I work really hard at my job and try to do a great job with it because my home life's in a mess. It's a form of control. It's a form of trying to. Uh, I mean, probably they feel like they need to be that way in person in real life, and they're unable to do so. So being able to express that, it can be very therapeutic. It can be wonderful. But if it's a continued power without accountability and change and growth, then it's almost as if they were abused, most likely, and then they bottle that up, and then it comes out, and then they kind of do that in this Dungeons and Dragons setting, which once again is a lot better than punching a wall or kicking a cat or domestic violence. But they've learned that they feel weak and inadequate whenever they were attacked. Therefore, when they get in this setting, they're able to attack out there, and they are able to feel better about themselves because they do that. And then sometimes, if you don't have physical strength, it can be like, well, I'm pretty smart, and this DM is incredibly smart. If I can beat him, then it's a challenge.
Well, the other thing I'd like to kind of expand on that a little bit, and ask if they do you think, because we don't know for sure, but do you think with the successes that they have in the games, do you think that they can actually address some of those issues? Do you think that they can feel the difference that it makes, or do you think they revert once the game is done? Do you think that they are able to hold on to the success, or do you think it reverts back? Now, there's an individual that I'm thinking of myself, but no names, that I could tell in his social interactions with us when I first started playing with this young man to where he was by the time we stopped playing with him. His personal value did seem to increase in our social setting. Do you think that was directly a result of the game, or do you think it's something else as he grew up? Do you think it's something that the game was therapeutic on? Do you think it was
I,
just his natural biology?
I think it was therapeutic. I think there was some growing up. And I think that we always have those choices. I think to not choose is a choice, but we have choices. And sometimes just knowing that there's other options and other availabilities that you learn about through the escapism and the fantasy and the no rules, and you can say anything you want, and we try to figure out how to make it work, the acceptance part. That um, I know a set of twins, and their father was an alcoholic, and he beat them. One twin grew up and became a preacher, and they asked him why. And he said, because I saw my father and I didn't want to be like him. The other twin grew up to be an alcoholic and abusive, and they asked him why. And he said, because I saw my father, and so I'm just like him. I think the twin that became a preacher only became a preacher because there was he thought that there was other options available. By that I mean is he had to see something, he had to know something, he had to talk with somebody that witnessed to him, or that kind of thing. And I think in Dungeons and Dragons, when you can be anything you want, including like a tiefling or an Aasimar or an angel or a fallen angel, that gives you the idea in real life that you've got other choices and you don't have to be who you are. And uh, most of my inspiration comes from people that don't exist. It comes from books and movies. And there was a time in my life when I was starting off as a therapist. They were talking about ethics and how you're supposed to act and do no harm and make sure you keep separate. And I don't want to bore you with the details because it was a boring class. But from that information, I incorporated into what was important to me. And I took some of the stuff I learned from my parents, from other people and family and friends. But to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of my decisions that I did based off of ethical guidelines came from the Jedi Code.
Sure.
You know, uh, there's flaws in the Jedi Code. I think that not making connections with people is a very, very poor one that ended poorly for them, and it's one of the reasons why I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons because I realized that. But you can take from that world, um, and it don't have to exist for them to be your hero and for you to model yourself after it. But I firmly believe that if you're positive and you think positively and you do solution focused, you can make a difference. If you just look at the problem, you will only see the problem. And if you only see the problem, you will not get out. So for Dungeons and Dragons, for me, is it opens up the door to solutions that I never would have thought of that I use in my day to day life.
Well, I've got a question for you. This is coming from a dungeon master to a relatively new dungeon master.
With not a lot of experience yet, but I'm learning.
Now,
Friend
there's
it.
a there's a couple there's a couple of things that I've noticed. This is just from my own personal observation that you've gone from somebody who was not confident in their abilities and was very vocal on saying things like, I can't do this. I'm not good enough to do this. I'm nowhere near as good as you are. I'm nowhere, blah 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 blah, yakety smackety. But I've seen that you have grown and you have gotten better at your dungeon mastering skills. You've become a better storyteller. You've become more confident when you're telling the story. Has that been useful to you outside of Dungeons and Dragons? Have you become a better therapist because of it?
I have. Actually, I had to use therapy techniques to get that. Because what I had to tell myself was, Jonathan, you can't be the next Jeremy Allen. You can't be the next Matt Mercer. Uh, don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to who you were. That's what you look for. And in Dungeons and Dragons settings and a DM setting, basically it would be like if I picked up a guitar for the first time and I tried to play like Eric Clapton, I'm a failure. I'm going to quit. I'm not going to try. So with Dungeons and Dragons, especially with DMing, I was comparing myself to two people with a cumulative 70 years experience in Dungeons and Dragons and a probably cumulative 68 years of DMing. They're both writers, they're both storytellers, and all I could think of was the stuff that's in my head's not coming out of my mouth. I don't like this. I'm a failure. Instead of control, you can control, work on this, uh, immerse yourself in the story. It's an escape, it's a reality. And so I can't do the voices, that's just an assessment. But whenever I'm a bartender, instead of saying the bartender hands you something, I say I reach up and I give you this. It's gold and shiny and circular. And you're like, oh, and then you go from there. That is storytelling, but it's different storytelling. And then what I needed to do was stop looking at other people. I call it Facebook religion. You look on Facebook and they're like, I'm at the beach, I'm having a wonderful time. Isn't my family great? Isn't my spouse wonderful? And you see that snapshot of that. And then I'm like, I'm here with, chicken nuggets on my chest from where I fell asleep eating earlier. My life's miserable. But those people, they're not posting pictures of them in the bathroom floor crying at 2 a.m. They're only doing that. So you're looking at that part of it. So I think that what it helped me more than anything else was stop comparing myself to other people. And that's very therapeutic. And then what it did was you're supposed to enjoy this. There's not like there's a score. You don't get like rated, Jonathan, you got a 7 out of 10 stars on this. This is you and your friends, and your friends care about you. You can tell by the mean things that they say. But it took the, oh man, I don't even want to say this, the self doubt and the incrimination and the picking on myself that I was doing that I would never do to anybody else. Anybody else is just starting off, I'd be like, "You're just starting off. You're fine." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I should do this by now." And anytime you say, "If this would have happened," or "I should have this," or "I should have known that," you're mistaken, and you're just beating yourself up. And by going into that and immersing myself in the story, and then I get lost in the story, then when I'm through, I'm like, oh yeah, I did a whole lot better this time because I was really, really vested in, Jeremy killing this dragon. And if Johnny had hit one more point higher on his arrow shot, that would have not happened. How cool is that? And I just think it makes you grow. And I think when you practice something, you get better at it. So when you practice solution focused, when you stay up at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, I'm going to learn Animal Messenger so that I can send an animal that I see in town to a tiefling mage so that he can meet us at Mage's Rest so that we don't get killed by everybody on the way. The DM's not going to think of that. That's going to be awesome. That's going to be sneaky as I'll get out. I become a better person. I communicate more. I interact more with the story. It's less of a, I call it role playing artist. You know, I it's all about the numbers, and if you can change the numbers into it's about a person and go from there, it makes such a huge difference. But when I roll a one, I get very mad at myself.
I think we all do. I mean, we say it's the dice's fault, but it's really us, and we're like, how
Yeah,
could I have rolled a one in this situation?
it's I blame the plastic, but it's me.
Um, one thing that I would like to talk about just a little bit. Um, we've got a few more minutes.
But
Um, one thing that I see is that when people, again, this is no negative aspect or negative take on some of the Dungeons and Dragons games that are out there for open consumption, like Critical Role or uh, High Rollers or any of those games, because they're fantastic games. People look at those games and they're afraid to play Dungeons and Dragons because their dungeon master is great at telling voices or doing voices. Their players are great at character interactions. Um, and so there's this sense of I'm not good enough to play Dungeons and Dragons, or I'm not smart enough to play Dungeons and Dragons. One thing that I know for a fact is that I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for a long time. Things like that were never an issue when I started to play. I didn't grow up playing in this era of Dungeons and Dragons. I grew up playing was we had a book, we had dice, we had some character sheets, and then if they chose to be fun acting interacting with each other, and that's what we did. But I see a lot of almost like deer in the headlight looks of people, even just sitting around a table, especially if it's their first, second, third time playing, where they're comparing themselves against these people who are superior role players, so to speak. Um, what something because I know you do it as a dungeon master. You compare yourself to Matt Mercer, which
I am
nobody.
doing it less, but I am doing it.
Um, what do you think you would possibly say to somebody who would come like let's say you
Hey,
go to a
hey,
friend of
hey,
yours and you
Jeremy,
have yeah,
you're roboting and we lost your video.
oh really?
Yep.
Am I gone?
I
Lost
think
my network.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Oh,
I heard a click, and then you went out camera, and then signal.
oh.
Y'all doing great, by the way.
Thanks. It's horrible. How do I uninstall it? Did he log out and log him back in or something?
Nope, he's still here.
Tell him prove it.
Pictures or it didn't happen.
Exactly. So how long is this supposed to go? I feel like I've talked too much, Dave.
Y'all are at 40 minutes right now.
Okay. So if we wrap it up in a few, we're good?
Yep. You can go up to an hour, so I mean. We want to milk you some more?
Okay.
Well, let me ask you a question, Jonathan.
Can-
How's it feel playing when people like me that are just flawless and perfect and they don't have these anxieties?
It's something to aspire to, Dave.
Oh, there you left.
But see, I think that you and I are like two sides of the same coin so much it hurts. Like you use power, but you use that to help people, and that makes you feel better. You know what I mean?
The White
Like
Knight
with
syndrome.
Margaret, like in real life and in Dungeons and Dragons. The difference is you're better at finding out whether or not you're being used, and you don't put up with it quicker than I do. And me, I don't give up and quit, and you're like, the heck with them. And I'm like, no, if I try harder, I can get them back. And you're like, no, you only reserve that for like 2 people, Johnson. Don't do that to everybody. That's ridiculous.
Same thing about giving away your last healing potion and.
Yep, 100% without a doubt. Because in a fantasy world, I can do something and the heal and they get better without any negative consequences, without me having to wait for them to respond, and I can feel good about it because I give them that and it gets better. And only when Jeremy uses his evil voice, I know it's going to end poorly. Do I wait? But if I hadn't have done it, then we wouldn't. Well, I'll put it this way: I'm not the one that saved the originator of a plague that can kill mankind and made sure that she was okay. All I did was like save a bugbear and a goblin up until the Nothic.
But she was just a child.
Trust me, I know that. Ward knows that. But guess what? Ward would have done it anyway. But I guarantee you that all the stuff that Ward did that the bugbear was for, he wouldn't have done it anyway. And I'm like, we could kill everybody in the entire world, and my friend wants to help her, and I want to help her because she's a child, so that's what I'm going to do.
Well, see, the way I look at it like this is she had no choice.
Right. But until I found out about the Nothic, that's what I thought when it was strapped there. It's just, I tend to think more positively for longer than you.
The thing is, the Nothic is an evil creature.
Okay, well, Dave, that takes somebody that knows the manual. Knows a bugbear, Dave. Come on, man.
Hey, my internet pooped out. Sorry about that, guys.
That's
Welcome
okay.
back.
I still remember what I'm supposed to say.
I'm going again.
Okay.
Okay, I forgot where I was going with that question.
I will tell you what I heard, and then we can finish from there if that's okay.
Okay.
I actually looked this up earlier this week. it's called the Matt Mercer effect.
Oh, sure. I've heard about that.
It's the Matt Mercer effect, and they're like, I can't do this as well as them, and they have the expectations of that, and you're comparing yourself to them. Similar to me in the DM with you guys. Matt Mercer found out about it, and he says, "No, no, no, please, no, don't do that." He said, "This is art. This is fun. This is fantasy." He said that the only person that can be you is you, and you play the fantasy. Don't compare yourself to other people. And the example that I was using earlier about me comparing myself to Eric Clapton when I was playing would ruin it and take the fun out. He said, "This is supposed to be collaborative and fun with friends. And unless you have a YouTube channel and you're showing it to everybody, it's going to be just your friends." Mix it on. And it's supposed, and so you, I wrote it down here because I wanted to make sure. It's unlimited creative freedom, but we're putting limits on it that it's not the way you're supposed to be. It's like people can draw and it can be therapeutic and it can be useful and it can be helpful, but it doesn't look like their favorite artist, so they quit. Uh, so I think that is one of those stinking thinking things, and I say that a lot, but it happens a lot. To where we're comparing ourselves to other people and we don't feel like we fit. And D&D gives you a chance to explore and grow and do that. Because sometimes I learn from making mistakes. So if I make a mistake and I learn from it, then good, then great. And if it's a Dungeons and Dragons setting to where it doesn't like affect my credit score or my car wrecking, then also great. Do I lay awake at night thinking I can't believe you jumped the wrong way off a pier and hit a wall instead of into the ocean?
Yes.
Yes. Do I think about the aboleth could have killed you because of that? Also, yes. Did I learn from it? Yes. Um, so if you notice that whenever we're playing, almost every time I ask the dungeon master to give me a vision of the scene, tell me what's going on, and do that kind of stuff. And I've done that, I believe, ever since then.
Yes, you have. You have.
But also in real life, I was talking to a teacher yesterday about a child that was having some problems. And I was like, well, I need to understand completely what's going on. Can you explain it to me? And I had one of those aha moments that was like, Jonathan, you just use Dungeons and Dragons in real life to help you in a situation. And it's fine to say, I don't understand that. What I heard you say was the clarification. And I would have never done that in the past because that's social interaction and talking that I learned through this setting to do. And I feel like 90% of the time in the past, I was doing problem solving and only looking at the problem. And thanks to Dungeons and Dragons and talking with friends and sharing the time and feeling safe and feeling able to do that kind of stuff and just say whatever and think outside the box, I now look for solutions. And that's huge.
That is huge.
Because if you want to find negative in somebody, you will find negative in anybody. And I'm not a religious person anymore. Probably should be. And I'm not putting my religion on anybody. But in the Bible, Jesus was said to be perfect. And when it came time for people to ask what was going on and pick who got out of prison, they picked a murderer. So if people will pick a murderer over Jesus who is perfect, then I don't really need to care too much what other people think about me, knowing that I'm not perfect, and not let their idea of who I am. It's not even true. It's not their. It's what I think they think of me to find who I am. That needs to come from me.
That's correct.
Dungeons and Dragons helps me do that because I can be tall with hair and an elf ears if I want.
I sense a theme that you might be self-conscious about your male pattern
I'm
baldness.
wondering if you were going to bring that up.
You brought it up twice.
You
brought it up twice.
And there's a reason for that. That shows the thing that I can't control that I held on to, and instead of dealing with it, I dealt with the other stuff.
Well, plus, you also take away some thunder from people who are trying to insult you by insulting yourself first to let them know that it doesn't bother you.
How dare you? Yes.
Believe me, I know. I do
Yeah,
it all the
but
time.
that's also negative thoughts, thinking, and attacking. And once again, though, what I've started doing, for real, is if I wouldn't say it to a friend, I wouldn't say it to me.
Yeah.
But I've got bald friends, so.
Okay. This has been a great interview, bud.
I hope
Thank you
so.
for taking the time. I
Yes,
know
sir.
that you you're very nervous about doing this, and that's okay. You don't you did wonderfully. You did great,
Thank you.
but I appreciate it, and maybe some viewers out there who've seen this, maybe they can take that step to go find a Dungeons and Dragons group and find a group of friends that won't care necessarily who you think you are, but will care about who you are, and you'll have that social bonding that you need to survive as a human being. Because unfortunately, as human beings, we're social creatures by nature, and it's something that we need and we crave, even though we don't know that we need and crave it. Um, but Jonathan, it was a wonderful interview. Do you have any closing remarks, Dave
Nope,
or
y'all did
Dexalo?
great.
What about you, Jonathan? Do you have a closing statement you'd like to say?
I wanted to come up with something wonderful, but I thought I'd just shoot from the hip and from the heart. It's been 4 years since I started playing. I wouldn't be where I was now if that didn't happen. I've met new friends, and it's improved my life greatly. Um, Taking the risk, being scared, and doing it anyway made a huge difference. I ignored one of my friends asking me to play for 30 years before I did it. But instead of beating myself up for that, I'm going to appreciate the fact that I did do it and it made a difference. It's okay to fail. It's okay to try. You're not alone. There are people there for you. And the major mental health component thing that's not Dungeons and Dragons related is I felt like I needed to give people the opportunity to know that there's a 1-800 number that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if you want to harm yourself or hurt yourself or you need to talk, you can call that for free and talk to someone. And if it's okay with you guys, I would like to say the number, but I didn't know if that was allowed on this kind of format. But I feel like knowing that there's somebody there for you, uh, your depression, your anxiety will lie to you, your luck.
Yeah, that's good. I'll put the number in the description below as well.
Great. It's the 1-800 crisis line number. It's 1-800-715-4225. Please use it. I know that you sometimes think that the world will be better off without you, but that is a lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Um, parting shot for me, real quick, is um, it's kind of like what Gandalf says in Lord of the Rings. You find Dungeons and Dragons not necessarily when you're supposed to, but when you need to. Or you find that game, or you find that way to socially interact when you need it the most. Um, I know for personal experience, major major trauma or major events will cause you to uh, be self-destructive in some ways. Reach out, reach out if you can. Reach out to your game group if you have one. Reach out to your family if you think they can help you, or if they're the cause of it. Reach out to friends or a therapist. There's millions of wonderful people who do this kind of work as a living. Um, but remember that you are valued. You are appreciated, and it will be okay if you give it a chance to be okay. But for Mental Health Heroes, I'm Jeremy. This is Jonathan, and then there's Nexodon Dave, and
Hi.
we hope we hope we see you at the next table.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye, guys.